All right, let's get started. My name is Eli Singer. I'm the CEO of Jethro Data, and wanted to thank you all for joining us at the Under the BI Webhood seminar, a webinar with Symphony Health. I'm joined here today with Sue Davis. She's the Director of Application Development for Symphony Health, and Dave Freriks, who is a Qlik Evangelist for emerging technologies. And what we'll talk about today is how Symphony Health is able to deliver interactive BI over billions of rows to their customers and users. I'll start by taking a couple of minutes describing and introducing Jethro to you. We'll then have Sue take us through their use case, the environment, the challenges, the solutions, and a live demo of the application. Dave will then talk more about the integration technicalities between Jethro and Qlik. And lastly, I'm hoping to have at least 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please log them into the chat or the Q&A tab so we can get to them. So with that, let me quickly introduce Jethro. We really focus on enabling BI on big data. That's our exclusive focus. Our only use case that we're trying to address is when you have BI tools you want to connect live to large data sets in Hadoop. And your success criteria and requirements are performance and high concurrency. If that is your use case, that's where Jethro fits in. Typically, when we go to market, what we see from our customers is that they are in the process of offloading BI applications from legacy DW platforms to Hadoop. Of course, what motivates that is greater scale and lower cost. What their requirements are is to get the scale and cost, but without sacrificing performance and functionality. Typically, the challenge that people run into is when you try to connect your BI to the native full-scan SQL engines in Hadoop, you don't get the live performance that you need. And the alternatives that we've come across are people re-engineering their data model so they can speed up access to those data sets. In some other cases, that simply give up on trying to do live BI on Hadoop and move that data to other platforms in the cloud or just back to EDW services, or try to use a BI acceleration service that would just speed up BI on their Hadoop system. And that's where Jethro fits in. Our customers use Jethro to accelerate their BI on their big data in Hadoop. What we provide is response time in seconds to all type of BI queries, scale it up to thousands of users, to billions of rows, and do all of that without having to re-engineer your data or without having to rebuild or redesign your BI applications. In a nutshell, Jethro is a transparent middle tier. We run on top of Hadoop and sit between the BI tool and the underlying data. The key to Jethro, of course, is performance. The way we accelerate BI queries over your data in Hadoop is using two key features. One is indexing. We automatically index every single column of your data set. And the second one is cube aggregations. We automatically build those cube aggregations based on actual user queries. This is all self-maintained. No need for DBAs to design very carefully what a cube looks like or which columns to index, fully automated. And it's tightly integrated with your data lake. The data always stays in Hadoop. It never leaves your Hadoop, or if you use a cloud platform. The key, of course, is being able to use cubes and indexes. If you think of the range of BI queries, they can start from being highly aggregated, query like summarize sales, group by state. In this case, you want to go through the entire data set, but produce a small result set. For these queries, this type of queries, having a cube aggregation is the best solution. We pre-aggregate the data, and when we get the aggregated query, we have very little work to do. But if you look at the other extreme, on the other side, we have highly granular queries. Queries that says, for example, show me all transactions by user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In that case, cubes will not be able to help us. They will become way too big to include a granular column or high cardinality column like customer ID. And in that case, indexes are a much better solution. And Jethro uses both. We use them to complement each other. And it turns out that those use cases where cubes are inefficient because they will become too big are exactly the same use cases where indexes are highly efficient. and vice versa. So Jethro Optimizer can choose which one to use based on what the query is. So in terms of indexing, we index all columns. That's pretty simple. What I want to spend a few seconds on is explain how AutoCube aggregations work in Jethro. So if we assume a large transaction table, we have billions of entries for each sales transaction, and a query that comes in that says, summarize sales for all transactions that happen in state Arizona. In this case, we don't have an aggregation yet. What Jethro will do is use the index. We'll go to the index for column state. We go to the entry for Arizona, get the row IDs for Arizona, and then go and fetch the sales data for the Arizona rows. Sum it up back to the user. Next, what Jethro will do is try to create automatically a cube aggregation for this query. The way we do it is by taking the query and trying to turn it into an aggregation. We do that by simply taking the columns from the filter, moving them into the group by. So Jethro will generate by itself a query that looks like sum sales group by state. Let it run in the background, and when it's done, we're going to have our cube aggregation. And if we get any permutation of the original query, instead of Arizona, state equals Alaska, or state is in California, New York, we will be able to use the cube aggregation we already built. And if a minute later, another query comes in, and instead of state equals Arizona, it has zip code equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we will build another aggregation, this time for zip code. And this will continue as the application and your data evolve. In summary, there are 3 approaches to doing BI on Hadoop. The first one is to simply point your BI tool at any of the SQL engines in Hadoop. And in that case, you'll find that most of the queries will have to full scan the data and be somewhat slow. The second approach is to build manual cubes on Hadoop. There are all-up cubes in Hadoop solutions in the market. In that case, some queries can be put into a cube and be accelerated. Some cannot if they are granular or if they access data that's not being put in a cube. And in that case, they'll have to do a full scan. Or Jethro's unique approach, which uses a combination of indexes and AutoCube aggregations. So with that, I'd turn it over to Sue to tell us more about how they're using the system and what their use case looks like.
Okay, so let me go and share my screen. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit real fast about how we use Jethro here at Symphony Health, and I'll start by giving a little background about Symphony Health. So there we go. So basically, we provide tons and tons and tons of data and analytics to help professionals understand it's really the healthcare market. So we do things like predictive market analysis, we report on physician prescribing, prescription fills, payer reimbursement, sales compensation, all those kind of things. So that's kind of the market we're into and the business that we're into. When we report our data, we typically have about 7 billion transactions yearly. We store over 4 petabytes of data, and we actually report on about 2 petabytes of integrated dataverse, which is our projected data. It's prescription and claims data, both medical claims and hospital claims. And basically, we actually will link the data between patient level data, prescriber information, obviously pharmacy information and product information for prescription products, and payer plan information. What we find is that for some of our applications, we have up to 900 concurrent users. So we have a lot of people tapping into that data all at one time. Today, our reporting technology stack includes ClickSense, MicroStrategy, Tableau, and some custom web stack reporting. What we're finding is that our clients are very, very, very thrilled with our Qlik applications. mostly because the speed at which we can provide the data back to them is fantastic. It's almost instantaneous, which we'll see when I go to do the demo. We do have our data in our Hadoop. We have it in cloud. So we have data all over the place. But one of the things that led us to get to Jethro and to use Jethro in conjunction with our Qlik reporting is that some of the challenges we were facing is that the BI tools we had, either they had great visualizations and were really slow, or they didn't, we could get a lot of data back quickly, but it was just data, rows and columns. There were no visualizations, no real insights to be gained from the data. One of the other things we found that was problematic is that some of the BI tools, you have to be really technologically savvy to get at it. Qlik makes that a whole lot easier. It's really point and click. It's very user friendly. So that's why a lot of our clients like that tool, and makes it easy to get at our data. Some of the other things we found: long run times, large volumes of data, and one of the big ones is the number of concurrent users. So for some of our applications and some of our deliveries, the number of concurrent users would kill our system. So what we did in order to improve our situation is we actually added Jethro, and as Ellie pointed out, it is the middle layer. So we have our data. Oops, sorry about that. I have the touch screen computer. I've got to stop doing that. The way we have our data stored in Hadoop, in the cloud, and in Oracle. We pull the data out, we pull it through into Jethro, and then we have our Qlik Sense and Qlik View reporting on top of that. So you can see that Jethro is definitely our middle layer here. So some of the benefits that we've seen, so as Ellie pointed out, the indexing architecture has dramatically improved our situation. They have adaptive caching, which helps, and and they have the cubing, and the scaling for concurrency has really helped us. Bottom line, by using Jethro, we can offer the interactive business intelligence on our very, very large volumes of data. So that's been a big proponent in us allowing Qlik and having the instant access. Some of the things we've noted with adding Jethro is we do see a time and cost savings as opposed to some of the other options that Ellie pointed out, building your own cubes, bigger machines, more memory, all of those other things. So some of the things we've noted is that our applications, prior to having Jethro in our technology, some of our applications were running up to 2 minutes long just to load up. Now they run in less than 15 seconds. And then for those that were between 2 and 6 minutes long, they're in less than 2 minutes. They come back. And finally, the cost savings, what we're looking at is probably somewhere in the vicinity of about $48,000 a year savings for hardware and memory that we would have had to have in order to accommodate the volumes of data and try to get the performance that we have today. So moving on, we have a couple of applications that we're currently deployed, or that we have deployed with the Jethro and Qlik. One of our big ones is our decision flow app. It's really based on patient transactions. It's patient transaction level data for prescriptions and claims. We have extracted data as well as derived metrics. We provide the data for the latest 24 months for each deliverable. And currently we're delivering 26 individual applications 21 different diagnoses. We do provide source of business applications, which really track patients over time, first use, refills, switching, all that kind of stuff. And we have product level prescription and diagnosis applications. So some of these applications get very, very, very granular. When you're looking at patients and their switching and their persistency, whether or not they're getting their same scripts month after month, it's very granular level data. Whoops, sorry. Very granular level data that we're looking at. We have another application, our corporate Vantage Practitioner Insight, and it is not market specific. It's really all prescriptions, all products, and there's, I guess, about 400,000 different NDCs or products out there, and this application provides insights into prescribers, payers, and product level data. Again, it's 24 months of data, and it's 8 billion rows of data. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to flip into a demo and show you how fast some of our applications come up. So I'm going to just log in. And you can see how fast we can bring up the applications. And if you look, that's how long it takes for us to bring up our applications with.
So we are still seeing your slide deck. Maybe you can switch to the other application.
It should be, okay, on my screen I see it. What do I have to do to, hold on a second.
Yeah, if you share screen, you can choose maybe your Chrome, or you can just share the entire screen.
Oh, you know what it is? I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry. That should, there's a, on the share screen, there's a different, is that better?
Yes, much better.
Sorry about that. In any case, you heard how fast I was bringing up that application, and it's very, very quick. And as you can see, it brings up the apps and our time for response. If I want, I can go pick the 12 months, and you can see that it brings back the responses almost instantly. I can pick, you know, and as you can see, just by that, the responses come back almost instantaneously. So this is one of our applications, and
if I can just interject for a second, each one of those dashboards generates over a dozen different queries being sent at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. With the different visualizations, you've got multiple different visualizations going on here at the same time. So that is absolutely true. And then we also have it attached to one of our Qlik View apps. And you can see that how fast that returns. And it comes back right away. Oops. This is one of the bigger ones, so this will take a few more seconds, and it's based on the selections that I made, so I just picked whatever.
And this one is running on the 8 billion rows.
This is the all products. There you go. And that was pretty fast to come back on all of that data. Specific NDCs, specific time periods for a full year's worth of data. That's how fast it came back. And that's not too shabby. So with that, that's how we use it. You can see the speeds that we've been able to achieve, the amount of data we've been able to use. And with that, I guess I can switch it back over to you, Eli.
Yes, I think Dave is going to go next and talk about the Jethro and Qlik integration and what actually happens under the hood.
All right. Hopefully I'm coming through okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Very good. Well, great stuff there. So those
We
are...
can't see you, we can hear you. We can just see a gray screen.
Aha. Hopefully it will come through. Anything yet? I'm supposed to be sharing the desktop. Is it anything
Yes,
yet?
now we got it.
All right, very good. Okay. So what we're going to talk about here is we saw some great dashboards. We talked about how awesome Jethro is. And we're going to talk a little bit about the different ways that we can leverage Jethro with Qlik. There's not one solution that that covers all the different ways of utilizing the amount of content and data that exist in a Hadoop system or in a big data system. So what are the different ways that Qlik can take advantage of the power and speed of Jethro? So let's go ahead and get started with the different buckets that we have, the different ways of leveraging methodologies. And they really break down into kind of 5 categories. And what we've seen, as we go through, we're kind of talking about ones that we've seen already today. And the way that we think about using them is really based upon things like complexity, size of the data, amount of dimensions, width of tables, and cardinality and things like that. So when do we use what methodology from Qlik to solve these big data solutions or create these big data solutions and solving big data problems? Well, the traditional way that Qlik's worked is to load the data in memory. Use the Qlik engine, the Qlik indexing, power the associative model, and this way works great. But as you guys know, there is a level at which there's too much memory or it's not practical to fit into memory. And so when we kind of get to that threshold, and which really in the 100 million, hundreds of millions, a billion, anything real over a billion, 1.2 billion, we start thinking about better ways of leveraging data. Now, for using in-memory, Jethro is great for just rapidly firing data so that we can get Qlik apps loaded and refreshed in very, very short order. We can use incremental reloads and QVFs and all the great techniques that Qlik has adopted over the years to make in-memory very fast, very powerful, and very fast on the reloads. But again, you do hit some walls where you need to think of other solutions. Some ways that can be done, especially for those that are familiar with QlikView, is what we call segmentation and chaining. And this is really taking apps and splitting them into secondary or smaller apps, partitioning by perhaps geography or company or other entities that you create smaller subset apps and essentially drill through from app to app to move across smaller buckets of data that are chunks of the master. This works generally very well. It's more of a QlikView methodology, but it doesn't have that document chaining concept that Qlik users are familiar with. Now, what we saw with Sue and what we saw with some of the demos earlier is what we call direct discovery. And this is direct queries that run against Jethro on the big data systems. Qlik is not loading the data into memory. It is issuing queries at runtime to go extract the result sets from the systems Still has the associative model, the green, white, gray. Each chart or calculation will be calculated on the fly dynamically. Direct discovery is very good when it's used properly. You also can mix in-memory data with the direct query as long as you're conscious of cardinality. You don't want necessarily high cardinality things to be mixed together. That can create processing issues. But when used properly, direct query is a very good way of leveraging the power of Jethro. Jethro has done a ton of work to add in complex functions, what we normally would call set analysis. Direct query doesn't directly support set analysis because those are in-memory calculations, but Jethro has built emulations of those into their data access layer, so you can do the same types of calculations that you would normally do with set analysis using Jethro. And that's a very unique proposition for direct discovery with Jethro that's not available on the greater market. This is a plus asterisk for using Jethro on big data with Qlik. The other options that we have are what we call on-demand app generation. And on-demand app generation is essentially allowing the users to start with summary levels of data, summary applications. Maybe I'm looking at information at a higher level of aggregation. And then when I want to go dive into details, I will then create a secondary app that will allow me to go get a subset of information and do my own analysis. So it's essentially a combination of guided analytics, analyze, then query. But at the end of the day, the user gets an app that they then own with their own data that they've gone, that's a segment or a slice of the master data. It's very good for governing, especially when you have a lot of data and you want to push your users down a path. You know, you don't want the user coming in and doing a select star from a table that has 10 billion records in it. That's not a good way of using data lakes. So this is one way we use to allow that on-demand generation of secondary apps with data. The other way that we do it, where we're seeing a whole lot of traction, is what we call, it's on-demand still, but it's using the APIs, and it's using what we call the QAP, which is the Qlik Analytics platform. With this solution, we're able to use any sort of front end, whether it's a Qlik app or we're using web toolkits, web apps, search screens, whatever we want, as long as it's a HTML, JavaScript-based construct. And it will use the power of what we call the Hypercube and the Engine API to create apps, to create dimensions, to create charts and graphics dynamically based on the user's selection. These apps can either be persisted or they can be temporary, and when you close your browser, they disappear, which is great from an administration point of view. These web apps that are created can be using traditional Qlik apps like we saw that Sue was showing, or they can be web apps that are powered by things like D3 or Angular or Canvas or other JavaScript frameworks. And Qlik is just providing the data to these other rendering engines. So we've really created Qlik as a pass-through mechanism for managing, indexing, associating the data, but the front end is your own web front end. And these scenarios are generated by the users, but they're usually implemented by somebody. You've got to have web skills. So these are really where we start going over to web developers to help work with the BI teams to create these machinations and create these mashups. So each one of them has their strengths, and you need to be able to understand when you walk into a scenario that you have options available to you based on what problem you're trying to solve, the amount of data, the cardinality of the data, and so it's Qlik gives you a lot of power and a lot of flexibility. Jethro provides a great streamlined, fast engine to populate whatever solution you might choose out of these big data methodologies. So that's kind of all that I had, Ellie. I'll turn it back over to you guys for Q&A and any other additional questions.
Awesome, thanks, Dave. So we already got a few questions. Anybody who has any questions, just please type them into the chat box. Let me answer some of that question we already received. There was a question about what is the largest data set that's being used with Jethro. And we have some use cases where the fact table actually is over 100 billion rows. The more important point to make about it with Jethro, because the data is fully indexed, the size of the data set doesn't really make a huge difference. In other words, if the query is filtered and the query is going to target, say, 1 million rows, and it takes Jethro 5 seconds to process this query, it will still be the same 5 seconds if the data set has 1 billion or 10 billion or 50 billion rows. Because the data is always indexed, we only pay the price for getting the rows that we need, not the price for the data set size as you would with a full scan engine. Another question we had is about incremental data. What happens as new data comes in? And Jethro can incrementally update all of its components. So our indexes, our autocubes, everything can be incrementally updated, and everything is done in the background and fully automated. So there's no user involvement in triggering an update or inconsistency, anything like that. The data access is always consistent, and incremental updates can be processed on the fly without impacting read speed. There was a question about partitions. I think this was during Sue's demo. The question was, is the speed that we see thanks to the data being partitioned? And the answer is no. Jethro does support partitions, but partitions in this case are used for maintenance, for purging all data. Partitions wouldn't really help here because, as we saw in the application, the user can choose any one of a dozen different filters to filter the data. And if you just partition, you have to choose 1, 2, whatever combination of columns you want, that would not work. So in Jethro, because we index every single column, we don't really mind how the user wants to filter the data. There's always going to be an index that would help with it. Next question is about how much data is residing in the source system versus in Jethro. So the answer here is, if you have a terabyte of raw data, text file, a Hive text table of about 1 terabyte, typically what you will see that the Jethro index version of that will be roughly a third or so, maybe 400 gigabytes. The bigger answer here is that Jethro ultimately is a trade-off between storage and performance. We do a lot of the work in the background. We pre-index and pre-aggregate the data. That, of course, takes storage to store. But then what we get is higher performance, and more importantly, or as importantly, at runtime, much less system resources being used. So to serve 1 million BI queries, Jethro will take much less resources than any of the SQL engines on Hadoop will. So we trade storage for performance and ultimately system capacity. There's a question about Jethro versus Impala. Impala is really a representative of the class of the SQL engines in Hadoop. The main difference is that all of those engines, Impala or Drill, Presto, Spark SQL, and so on, are full scan based. So with the exception of a partition key, every filter column of every query, of every dashboard, of every user will need to be full scanned every single time. And when you have large data sets and large number of users, this becomes extremely slow. So the differences between Jethro and those tools are two. We fully index the data, and we automatically build cube aggregations for them. There's a question about how long the aggregation takes. It really depends, of course, on the data set and the type of aggregation, usually a few minutes. The important thing to mention here is that because Jethro can leverage both indexes and cube aggregations, we only build very, very small cube aggregations. If we realize that the specific cube aggregation is going to be big, and big here is defined through a parameter, let's say over 10 million rows in that aggregation, we would simply not build it, because in those cases, it's most likely that the Jethro optimizer will use an index access for that query. So going back to the example I used earlier about show transactions for a specific user, if we try to put the user ID into an aggregation, it will make it hugely large. Makes no sense. So we only build small aggregations. Those don't really take too much time to build. Happens in the background, and very quickly they're available for users to use. Another question is about using JSON data. So we use Hive to incorporate the data, to read the data for Jethro indexing. So anything that Hive can read, Jethro can leverage. So JSON data is part of that. And there's another question about Jethro partitions. Again, we support partitions, but unlike Impala or other tools that use partitions for performance, use partitions as a filter, in Jethro partitions are simply for maintenance. We index all the columns, so you get the equivalent of speeding up every filtered query. You can think of it as logically a partition on every column. There's a question about estimating Jethro cost to the overall system cost. I'm not sure I know how to answer that, but what we typically say is, if you think of a generic application using a BI tool like Qlik on top, has a couple of billion rows, a couple of hundred users using it. What we saw from customer deployment is that a system like that would typically require 3-4 Jethro servers, Jethro nodes. We price Jethro by the node, so about $100,000, $150,000 per year per typical application, which of course no application is typical, but to give you a ballpark, for this kind of application, think of it as about 150K per year. Jethro can be used with multiple BI tools. Of course, our integration with Qlik is pretty deep. We support a lot of unique things for Qlik, but you can use Jethro with other tools as well. Right, a couple of other questions here about using a custom connector to Jethro. So Jethro works with a typical ODBC or JDBC connectors. Depending on the BI tool, it could be a named or a generic. Most cases, you would just use your generic ODBC or generic JDBC. And Jethro is pretty good at supporting the full syntax range of SQL that can come from BI tools. I think more questions are popping. All right, I think I answered that one. Jethro does work with multiple BI tools. I think we are getting close to the end of our allocated time. We would really be happy to speak with any one of you. So if you want to have a one-on-one demo or discussion with us, we'd love to talk to you about your own use case. I really want to thank Dave and Sue for being great partners and really helping us with this webinar. They will also be available for follow-up questions. We'll send you everybody's contact. So thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.